Good morning, everyone. My name is Brian Engelbert. I'm from TD Cowen, and want to thank you today for joining us on the Future of KPI Creation panel. I will let the guests introduce themselves a little bit after the first question, or with the first question, but just to start off with setting the table, when the alternative data industry had its inception 10, 12 years ago, or whatever it was, there was this idea that data vendors could just shovel some data to the buy side and everybody would gobble it up, pay up, and use it. And the reality is that didn't happen. And that didn't happen because people need help with data. People often, funds, for example, don't all have huge data budgets. They don't have technology budgets. They don't have huge data science teams or engineering teams. So what that means is folks that are on this panel that are in the value chain do create a lot of value in the process to help their customers and help funds, for example, and corporates and PE, if you will. So why don't I just start off with the first question, and with the question, obviously introduce yourself. So the first question for Kirk, if you could give an overview of the data ecosystem as you see it, and what is it about Carbon Arc that gives you an opportunity and the solution that gives your customers an advantage and help in this new model of yours?
Thanks for the question. My name is Kirk McEwen. For background, I spent 20 years on the buy side in investment management, and I worked mostly at three firms, Tudor Investments, Glenview Capital, and I joined SAC in 2012, which became Point72. And I built research systems at those shops. So my last role at Point72, I had built and run market intelligence, which was the proprietary research business for the firm. Sitting in that seat, I was a big buyer of alternative data, sort of was buying millions and millions of dollars worth of data on an annualized basis. So it had a balance sheet at a time when, looking back to 12 years ago, when credit card data was first proliferating on the street, sort of was in the mix buying that data, which was a great seat. But what became very clear in sitting in that seat was that while we had balance sheet to buy, a lot of firms, and certainly the companies we were investing in, didn't necessarily have the same balance sheet. Supply and demand are really far apart in the data ecosystem, and that's sort of the fundamental sort of first principle that I would lay out in thinking about the data ecosystem, is that data is bought and sold as a CapEx, sort of element, not as an OpEx, right? And so you need a fair amount of capital to deploy against the purchase of a data set and/or a portfolio of data sets. Once you do that, you need to bring it into your house, transform, structure, and then sort of evolve into use case development and KPIs that requires engineers and scientists. It's easier to buy a house or a car in the United States than it is to buy a data set, and then you don't need an engineer to drive your car, right? So fundamentally, you've already taken the total addressable market on the consumer side to 500 or so buyers above $2 million in the United States. So you've got a really sort of balkanized end-to-end for supply and demand around data. And so for all the data that exists in the world, very little of it actually makes it into the hands of the decision makers. And so I left Point72 at the end of 2020 and started Carbon Arc with the idea that supply and demand were too far apart. The ability to pay and willingness to pay for data were the biggest drivers of data liquidity. And if you could embed and engage use case development further back into the process and deliver actionable insight to customers at scale and have them pay for what they consume, you actually can transform how data gets bought and sold in the world, right? And so started building that in 21, and it's a build, and it's certainly a very difficult sort of category enhancement that we're trying to do. But the Gen AI moment has been sort of a really interesting flashpoint that's sort of brought to light a lot of the problems in the data market. They were largely sort of in place and known because of, the financial services firms could see the problem, but a lot of other people couldn't. And so there's a lot going on in the space, and I should stop talking because I've been chattering too much. But anyway, nice to see everybody.
Thank you, Kirk. Sunaina, anything you want to add to Kirk's view of the world data ecosystem? And maybe you could talk a little bit about how investors use data.
Absolutely. Hi, I'm Sunaina. I run partnerships at M-Science. I've been with the company for 9 years now. It's been really fascinating to see how the data landscape has evolved over the past, 10, 15 years. Back in 2016, when you would meet people and talk about data, you had to explain what data was. And here we are sitting on a plethora of data sets, and we're trying to make sense of all of this data that we have right now. I think where M-Science is, highly differentiated is the fact that we have homegrown analysts who not only understand, companies, they understand the themes behind the companies. They understand much more than the fundamentals of what happens with these companies. They are able to articulate and tell stories behind the data. Like consumer transaction data can give you top-line revenue. Like take Chipotle, for example. It's great to I get the top-line revenue metric of Chipotle, but people want to know what's in the basket. Like are people buying guacamole or queso? Is queso, the addition of queso actually moving the stock? Chipotle released a new protein. Is that new protein actually moving the stock? And that's where our analysts are able to articulate the why behind why a certain KPI makes sense and how to use that as well with our clients. So our clients really appreciate that, and they're not readily available. They've got a lot of experience doing that, and the fact that we have such a varied set of data assets, and we're able to use ML and AI on top of the data, and we have these analysts create such a unique value proposition for our clients.
Thank you. Sandy is often talked about with me about anybody can buy a data set, but to get good use out of it is no small task. Dara, why don't I move to you? So the last panel was a lot about regulation and governance. And so given your background in legal and compliance, I'd love to hear a few things from you. I mean, no one wants to be the bad guy or the bad gal and tell people, no, you can't do this. But in legal and compliance, we need people to help get the change started. So while most people up here are producing outputs or producing product that becomes usable, folks like Dara from FTI are behind the scenes getting things prepped and worked properly from inception so that things can be done in a compliant way. And if that can't be done, then none of the product can be generated. So maybe you can talk a little bit about your experience with the legal and compliance area.
Great. Thank you very much. I am at FTI right now. I sit basically in compliance operations, that unit focused specifically on data and models. And my career trajectory has been interesting. I've been a data lawyer since before that was a thing. It first started out getting data sets from countries that didn't allow the export of data or dealing with complex data sets that are subject to export controls. And then I started to see people asking questions during due diligence or divestitures about who owns the data, is this valuable, and trying to get some real understanding of what the value of data was. We then started to see the rise of data aggregators. And so I've worked on both sides of this business. So I started out working for sellers, and a good way to understand that role is that a seller of data is creating a product. It's a product counsel role. Is the product fit for use? Can we make certain representations? Can we make certain warranties? And that's been true in financial services, in healthcare, in pharma, and actually in heavy industry for a very long time. Those industries have really needed data to really advance their own products and business cases. In this industry, it's interesting. Data has increasingly been subject to regulatory scrutiny, both directly through, for example, the SEC's programs on alternative data, but also increasingly as firms are using this data to make investments, they're talking about that in their public filings, and that needs to be true. So there's two levels of diligence that needs to happen. It's pre-acquisition, And many firms already have legal and compliance firms that are reviewing the data to make sure that the representations in the contract are correct. Some are also starting to do post-acquisition diligence to make sure that the data continues to conform to the original representations, but also as the regulatory landscape is changing, privacy laws are changing, that the quality of the data remains consistent. So I know that a lot of data science teams were reporting that certain consumer originating data sets really stopped operating the same way after 2020, 2021, and it's because the originating sources had made a lot of changes to the way that data was acquired, and it was influencing the composition of the data set as people were starting to comply with the CCPA. So also as companies are starting to create more novel and homegrown products around the data, the requirement for additional ongoing testing is increasing, usually not only to be compliant, but to ensure that their own products and own use of it are fit for purpose.
Great, thank you very much. I'd like to move to Michael from Covariance. We know that some of the larger funds like the rawest data possible because they can generate their own unique insights, but not everybody has the teams to do that, as we've talked about. And I know Michael, part of the core value prop of the business is he helps people with create KPIs via a scientific process at scale. So do you want to talk a little bit about that? And do you think your clients view you as an extension of their data science team?
Great, and yeah, strongly agree with everything shared so far. Our viewpoint is most data is unused today. And and a little bit of our background on myself, some background in quant finance, and put out a bunch of work on machine learning for alt data as part of a PhD at MIT. What we find is, both on problems on the corporate and asset management side. So on the corporate side, folks are trying to make billion-dollar decisions and with directionally wrong information on external intelligence. And so there's a huge pain point of like, how do you take external data and not combine it with the first party and to inform operational decisions? And what we find is most people are just not doing that. So this is where we come in, look like Palantir for the external world on the corporate side, and getting mixes of first and third party data into those ops decisions. And so we're Palantir for the external world on the corporate and signals for funds. And on the fund side, exactly to your point, and very similar to the CapEx versus OpEx point, there's a huge CapEx of how do you get signals out of a data set. So take a row-level raw data set, it costs a ton of money. It could be millions, tens of millions of dollars to go mine certain categories of signals out of the data. So it's really easy to add stuff up, get a revenue number from a card data set. Is it right? The panel, there's bias, it changes every day. Pick any other data set that's a sample, like sampled effectively, or has some bias with changing. There's a similar problem. And so what we're doing is operating, the core value prop is combining data assets to effectively triangulate in on a single KPI, as opposed to a breadth approach, which also a reasonable way to approach things. But hey, let me just overlay 60 data sets, look at the trends, and then make a human in the loop decision based off of that, as opposed to actually combining the different sources of data into a single number. So we live in this latter category, which is really like combining data sets together in depth out of a single data set. And it's hard to do that. So it's Richard Feynman used to say it's hard to know something. It's hard to set up a scientific experiment and measure things appropriately and reason about with confidence the output. And so what we find is most people aren't doing that, or just overlooking data sets and even signals that you could get out of a data set if you were to invest the depth. And so what we do is that's exactly the value prop from our side. And from the customer side, we're sort of the CapEx piece of like that investment in scientific rigor and process to go mine signals out and combine it with whatever other data assets. And so it's a sort of build once, deploy everywhere, and end effect is cheaper and better for end clients.
That's great. I think you hear in the LLM world, at least in the unstructured area, a lot of people using first and third party stuff. But in the alternative data world, I think you hear much less about folks using first party data. And so that's interesting that you help people with that. Sandy, Sandy works in healthcare. Healthcare claims data is highly complex. I work at Kyber, where we work with that data, and it's unique, it's complex, and I would say in the last 4 or 5 years, less than 4 or 5 hedge funds could probably use this data in its rawest form. It requires a tremendous amount of expertise. Now that's changed with the help of people like on this panel and their processes, but maybe you could talk, Sandy, a little bit about the skills required to manage and use and create productive outputs from these highly complex data.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Brian. And thank you for including me on this, this panel. I'm going to spend a few seconds just reiterating from my perspective what my fellow panelists have mentioned. But I'm Sandy Balkin. I'm the Senior Vice President of Strategy and Analytics at Royalty Pharma. We're the largest purchaser of royalties in the pharmaceutical and biotech industry and funder of disruptive medicines. We buy the royalty streams from the inventors of medicines. So we consider ourselves a private equity company, but we're also the most diversified pharmaceutical company because we get the most revenue streams. We get revenue streams from the most diverse source of products. Now, as I was thinking about preparing for this panel, I was thinking about first of all, I don't think that, I spent most of my career building analytics functions at companies like Pfizer, Sanofi, and Boehringer Ingelheim. Built the data science and engineering function at Truist, where we broke that Chipotle's carne asada launch because it broke one of our pricing scrapes. That was very exciting for us. But I don't think that alternative data is only 12 years old because we've been using data forever. And as I think about the evolution, 25 years ago, a subscription to the New England Journal of Medicine had a positive ROI. Then at Pfizer, we relied very heavily on IQVIA, formerly known as IMS data. And we had 3 people sitting in a closed room. All they did all day was SAS SQL accessing a VAX to extract prescription level data for us to analyze. Then we created our own analytic data mart and were able to access that data through SQL. Then claims data started appearing, and we had to have a 100-person team in Mumbai just to access this data using various sampling techniques. Then, then that data became more readily available, technology improved, and now I can access the 100 terabytes of claims data that I get every month on my iPad. But it's, but just because and I think about what Kirk said, as these data sets become more accessible, more sophisticated, and more people start using them, the alpha, the value of building an investment process around these data sets becomes less profitable. And you can't just stop reading the New England Journal of Medicine, stop using IQVIA data, stop using claims data. You have to add to those, and those data sets become table stakes. So now at Royalty Pharma, I have to have IQVIA data, epidemiology data, claims data, payer data. I have to have, we heard from the previous panelists about the explosion of biological and computational chemistry data sets. I have to have drug disease interaction data. I have to have adverse events databases. And all of these are not only very expensive, but have to be brought in, and they come from different places. And so we have to have data engineers and data scientists and epidemiologists to not only curate and stage the data, but also analyze and extract insights. The data that and like Kirk, when he was at Point 72, we have a fine balance sheet. And if I can say that we are going to make more or better deals with the inclusion of a data set, there's no question that I can have that data set. But it's becoming a lot harder to be able to say that, right? And there are data sets out there that I would love to have, but I can't guarantee that I'm going to be able to justify its purchase and there's going to be a positive ROI. And so my management then says, you can't have it because even though we have a fine balance sheet, there are finite resources, and we want you focused on the value-generating activities. On the other side, data providers have their one asset, or very few assets, because it's a very discrete, discretized, and fragmented market. They want to get as much as they can out of their data asset. And they think that what they have is going to be the end-all, be-all. I mean, Brian and I once were evaluating a data company that told us that their data set could predict recessions. And it clearly couldn't. But they were so sure that their data could predict market cycles that we couldn't come to equitable terms. And this happens quite often. And I think it's happening more and more where, especially in hedge funds that don't have as much funds as some of the biggies, getting access to the data, creating data science teams, is very difficult without being able to guarantee it's going to add to your alpha. And so I see this as a two-sided problem. One is being able to curate, ingest, and analyze data sets, but then also from the data asset vendors, being able to prove, and not just with an N of one, which they all do. They all have this one great example that where the data set would have changed an investment decision, but then the second one is never there, or rarely there. So how do the data vendors realize that they can't sell into us unless we can get experience with, and show that we can get alpha out of their data sets? And how do we pay for a vendor's data set with limited hands-on experience and not having the ability to guarantee that we're going to
Sandy, I find it hard to believe that a data vendor would tell you that their data set is way better than it really is.
Really, Brian?
So let's go to Kirk. So that was that was a little bit about the history of the space, the current state of affairs. Let's talk about what expectations are going forward. So Kirk, I don't know if you want to talk about the future of this business, KPIs, ML, AI, but maybe you could elaborate a little further on how you're combining data sets, how that's useful to your customer base, because not everybody can do that. And I know you've taken a big effort to do that.
Yeah, so we're building CarbonArc with an eye on history. One of the best things about being a research guy is that if you look at the past, eventually it repeats, and that's how you get to figure out what's going to happen in the future. And so we're doing the same thing with CarbonArc, which is, if you look back to like the 1930s in the United States, there were 13 exchanges or so where you could go to the market, you could buy stock with a wheelbarrow and a bag of cash, and you were a market operator, and you could arbitrage between New York and Boston and Atlanta and Chicago and San Francisco. And over time, those 13 exchanges became one exchange or a few exchanges. And sort of the market evolution, data trades like equities in the 1930s right now, right? And so the way we're approaching the problem is the idea that at the end of the day, just like on Wall Street, you still have to trade a stock. No matter what KPI you have, all the decisions you have to make, you still have to make a decision. In the same vein, we think the data needs to inform one of three things: whether you're a decision maker at a corporate or on Wall Street. It has to create new opportunities beyond the opportunities you have. It has to create a higher hit rate on said opportunities, which is lift, or you have to be able to make bigger bets. If you're not doing one of those three things with data, you don't have a data business, period, full stop, right? So fundamentally, on Wall Street, sort of improving hit rate, especially at some of the faster trading firms, anything sort of 30 to 60-day holding periods, trading the book 9 to 12 times a year, you improve the hit rate by 200 basis points, you're world class, right? The difference between good and great is 200 basis points. And so that is sort of the fundamental frame that we're trying to sort of engage around, which is like, how do you create an ecosystem for data that improves your hit rate at a price that provides a positive ROI? And so we bring in all this data, we structure it around companies, brands, people, and locations. We stitch dozens and dozens of data sets together, and create the structure so that there's a crosswalk between all of the data in our stack around, sort of this framework that allows for you to marry everything that's going on in a zip code or everything that's going on around a brand. And then we deliver those inputs to our customers who can storyboard all of those problems on a real-time basis. And we do that to allow for better decision making. Sort of where the puck goes, where I think the world goes, is that you start factoring actors. Like the Barra factor framework, which was so good for stocks. If you have enough data, you can factor Taylor Swift. She's got momentum, persistence, and resonance in every zip code in the United States. And then you tie it back to McDonald's and see if that is actually a fundamental sort of relationship that resonates. If you have enough data, you can factor anything. In that vein, I think that's this type of stuff that actually powers models in the future, not sort of these reams and reams and reams and petabytes of data that everybody's talking about.
Did you want to talk about your pricing model? Because you in terms of usage and the flexibility that gives buyers?
Yeah, so sort of we're taking it to the wall. It'll either be the best decision of my career or the worst. But we are selling these inputs on a consumption frame. So you can go into our stack and you can buy receipt data. Sort of in Boston, Huggies versus Pampers, 2018 to 2024. Tie it back to advertising efficacy in that market, and it'll cost you $8, right? That's sort of embedded in that price is storage, compute, and the underlying cost of the data on the left side of the ledger. And we're doing consumption rate deals with data providers. And so if we can achieve a density and velocity of scale, we're selling structured products. At the end of the day, a data prediction has time decay, volatility, and a cash flow associated with it, which are the fundamental inputs of pricing an option. So basically, if you think about it, we are trying to augment and enrich a financial system inside of a data framework.
It's fascinating because so many funds can be priced out with very expensive data sets. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out because you're allowing people to potentially participate where they couldn't participate before. So speaking of the future, Naina, there's this concept that data is the backbone of AI, or you need a data strategy first before you can have an AI strategy. So what is M-Science's perspective on AI going forward?
Yeah, so the way I look at it, I'm looking at it as 3 buckets, right? So the first thing is you need data. And I think from a data perspective, I think we've done a lot of work in getting different kinds of data sets, not just in the US, but from a global perspective as well. You're starting to see data proliferation in outside of the US, like UK and Asia Pac especially. So we've done a good job of curating data assets across the globe. And then the second thing is, technology. We've been using ML for data tagging for several years now. And thanks to the big tech, we have a lot of tools to implement AI and to play with AI. There's a lot that we don't know about AI. And AI is here to stay. And if you're not playing with it right now, then you're going to be left behind. And I think what has put us in the forefront is we've already created analyst-curated clean data feeds. And a lot of companies are sitting on data which is not clean, and it's going to be so hard for them to clean the data and make the data usable. I think at M-Science, we've done a really good job of creating those clean data feeds, which is pretty much going to be the backbone of AI. So we have a strategy in place. I think going into 25, we're going to be implementing these strategies, and we're going to figure out a way to generate revenue from those strategies. And I think that's what you're going to see going into 25, 26. And thanks to the Googles and the OpenAIs and the Microsofts of the world, they're building all of the tools. They're giving us, great reasons to learn from them. And I think we're going to learn, we're going to adapt. But I feel like we're in a really good position to move forward.
Great, thank you. Dara, we've seen a ferocious appetite for content in the LLM world, AI world. And so can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing there in terms of people seeking data, your customers ensuring that their data has proper privacy requirements met? Anything along those lines?
Yeah, I'll answer your question a little bit differently.
Sure.
Right? I think right now, particularly with generative AI and a lot of the corporate use cases, I think we're still in an era of real immaturity around really identifying value-based use cases for it that are actually actionable in corporations. So taking a longer-term lens, right, where I think this is going is particularly for compliance and compliance operations, which is where I sit. When the technology gets worked out, when the business cases get worked out, I think what we're going to start to see is really an acceleration of the shift left movement. And what I mean by that is we've started to hear about embed cybersecurity and design, embed privacy by design, embed privacy engineering by design. A lot of what I'm working on with clients, due to the complexity of some of the things that we've heard about, the amount of energy invested in the creation of these products, we are starting to see a replication of manufacturing quality control measurement, like measurable metrics, into knowledge-based work and an automation of that type of work. So I reflect that my business of legal and compliance is messy, it's time-consuming, it's expensive, it's slow, there's not a velocity there, and the activities are not always correlated to risk, and then to expand that across all of the different operations associated with cleaning data sets, embedding data sets, creating products, there will be, and I'm starting to see, real interrogation around bringing these processes earlier on into the model and embedding them and having the products develop red flags and self-report to be able to do real-time compliance. And that's going to be particularly important when we do start to have generative AI models that are really subject to drift and bias in a variety of real-time configurations. So I'm starting to see conversations in which people are starting to really operationalize compliance operations, and it's very welcome.
So it sounds like maybe versus 5 or 10 years ago, people are planning a lot better for what they're building. So whereas years ago, if you build something, there could be unintended consequences of the data it spit out and the types of data it was using. Kirk, did you have a comment? You looked like you were ready to chime in there.
Well, I was just going to ask, what do you think about sort of over the next couple of years, a federal oversight of or regulation of the space, and will that be helpful to the standardization of compliance on shift left, or do you see the organic bottoms up to be, sort of sustainable in the current setup?
So it's unclear to me whether or not there will be a federal regulation, and where we have seen sort of global regulations in the EU, they've lacked standards, right? There's actually no standardization around the concept of privacy by design. Not even NIST has it. Not even ISO has it. So I actually think that it will come from a bottoms up, because even if there is a standardization, I just don't think that there's the technicity or the techniques yet to do that. So I think it's going to be some of the biggest drivers that need to make their product safe. And I think safety has really been focused on consumer-based safety, but there's a real incentive for organizations where this is their primary way of driving revenue to make it safe for their own balance sheets. And so I think that's what's going to happen more likely. If there is regulation, I think it'll be a component of it and not end to end.
It does seem unsustainable to have all these state-by-state regulations around data. I mean, it's impossible to keep up with. And so as you enter data sets, particularly in healthcare, where there's very, very, very sensitive things, it's really almost untenable to manage it.
Yeah, well, it's not only the data sets that need to be managed, it's the models, it's the integration of the two, it's the integration with the hardware. All of this actually needs to be integrated in a way that can be tested for performance, for accuracy, for reliability. We don't really have standards around reliability yet, so I do think that that will start to emerge, and I think that companies are investing so much in the creation of this that they're going to want to know that there's real longevity to their investments, and that will come through that. So compliance testing, I think, will actually start to be less about regulatory compliance than to an organization's own internal benchmarking for economic performance.
Thank you. So speaking of going forward, Mike from Covariance, I think they're well known for their forecasting, prediction work. Is there anything you wanted to talk about there, even potentially comparing corporates to funds to channel partners?
Yeah, thanks. So for us, that all connects. So our approach is generally bottom up, so or disaggregation, aggregation. So maybe there's some aggregate public corporate disclosures. You disaggregate those instead of by quarter, by day, instead of by day, by region, beyond that by region, and by store, and by person. And so we actually simulate all of that. And we're actually in a unique position where we're leveraging and building models that incorporate both first and third-party data, either to help operators, or then rolling that up into forecasts that are compliant for sale and asset management. So what we're doing is we take an operator's view, whether or not it's third or first-party data, but to pick on retail, at a store level game, at a person level game, we're modeling, predicting on the sort of like highest possible resolution of consumers, and then aggregating that up to whatever level needed to calculate sort of whatever statistics the end customer is interested in. So if someone's interested in a store level forecast, region level forecast, certain segment insights and understanding, for us, and whether that's for the operator or the asset management, it all starts from the same place, which is going to the highest resolution data. And then to do that, we have teams of PhDs using a mix of, I would say you have to have some mix of stats, machine learning, and AI. It's a very long pipeline of hundreds of steps of some of it is horrible work, and I call high-skilled janitorial services at the start, maybe more fun things to talk about at AI at the end. And we found this works unbelievably well. It's also a framework where you can incorporate whatever, for combining data sets together. So, hey, I've got a competitive signal or a first-party signal or whatever it is. You need some framework, some economic modeling framework simulation that you can then run forward and plug everything in with varying levels of competence. So, for us, it's very much this bottom-up approach and a machine that you can then run forward at scale.
Great, thanks. And Sandy, how about you in terms of your AI efforts and what you expect going forward? Whether it be workflows in your own process or actually AI in healthcare solving health problems.
So there are a couple things that keep me up at night. One is that there's some information available, a data set available, an analytic available that I didn't employ, and it could have made or broken a deal. So it was either a missed opportunity or a deal or an opportunity that I could have kept us out of. And so with the amount of information out there now programmatically available in clinical trials, in mortality data, in computational chemistry and biology, in SEC documents, in syndicated reports, there's no way a finite set of humans can go through so much information. But yet, that's our job, to make sure that any piece of information that could have supported a deal or kept us out of a deal is found, understood, and mitigated. And so we're spending a lot of our AI efforts in mass scanning and interpretation of medical, PubMed, which is where all medical journal scientific publications are, all medical conference proceedings and posters, all transcripts, anywhere where a nugget of information could have been shared by a scientist, a patient, an investor, a company that could help us make or break or be more, improve our conviction or reduce our conviction in an investment. And I feel like that's where we're spending our most time in AI, to go through and make sure that for the first time, we really can find that needle in a haystack if it exists.
Great. I mean, content is king, and you're seeing it more than ever. So we have just a few minutes left, and I really liked a question from an earlier panel, and didn't prep the panelists for this, so hope it's not too big of a surprise. But I'm just kind of curious what you think could be a big surprise for the next year or two that people aren't talking about, or it's a worry, or something that maybe you haven't gotten to, but you hope to get to. And maybe we'll start with Michael. Is that something you care to talk about? Or is your roadmap pretty fixed?
I think for us, on the promise and what's going to happen with AI, I'd say is sort of like high variance, and I'd say what we expect versus market expectations is there's a lot more. There are great uses for AI.
Yeah.
But this, in the last several decades, there's been. But what is the right use in some of the problems we're talking about? And you can't throw everything. So I think the increasing sort of trend is like, hey, throw everything in a big model, and the model will solve everything. That's what we sort of see expectations going.
Yeah.
Big model solving everything, LLMs, all that stuff. That's not true for a lot of the problems that we've been talking about. It's a useful tool.
Yeah.
In some of the steps, in the hundreds of steps, cleaning tech, whatever it is. But mixes of data, large and small, how do you learn from few samples? How do you encode human intuition? Those are the things where it's a complementary to, but absolutely not going to be replaced anytime soon by these sort of LLM models and things that people are hoping will be a one-stop shop for all your modeling needs.
Makes complete sense. And so with just a few minutes left, I may cut you guys off, so make it real quick on it. And this can just be a speculative prediction. Kirk, how about you?
To build on Mike's point even more fervently, I think data structure advances over the next 18 to 24 months will render companies like NVIDIA to be the biggest shorts in the market. The amount of glass that was laid in 1999 by Corning didn't get lit up until 2007. That's what's happening in chip and sort of compute infrastructure. I think that the whole space is going to be upside down in the next 18 to 24 months due to small language models and the drive to better entity structure.
And I think with AI, data and compliance, right? Compliance is going to play a huge role with, AI technology advancements. I think I'll be curious to see how we adapt with it. And I think it's really important to have an open mind. There's a lot we don't know what we don't know. So I think we want to have an open mind. We want to learn. We want to adapt. And we need to pivot if we need to. So, yeah.
What I'm spending a lot of time thinking about is the AI risk event that's the equivalent to a cyber event and how we manage that. So we've started to see small events, but think about that at scale and how do the regulators deal with that? How does the company deal with that? So I'm spending a lot of time developing programs for AI incident response at scale. And I think we are going to see a lot of that. I think people have moved way ahead of themselves in deploying particularly Gen AI that's both internal facing and consumer facing. And we haven't even started to see some of the downstream negative impacts.
It doesn't have to be an AI. What worries me is that it doesn't have to be an AI issue. We had in healthcare, we had a major data provider cyber attack that created a huge level, the full regime shift in healthcare data because they lost a lot of data. Other companies, other data providers, other vendors were able to, the flow of patients went through other channels. So how am I supposed to create a repeatable process when the data itself might not be representative of the past or the future?
Available, yeah, and then how do you document that and assure? So, you're right, there is going to be some data and compliance issues, and I just think that sector is so focused on whether or not there's going to be regulations that they're not really figuring out how to adapt their processes, make them repeatable, scalable, efficient, and cost-effective. So I spend all my time thinking about that.
Thanks, great. Well, appreciate the panel today, and I encourage you all to come introduce yourself to some of the vendors up here and the rest of the panelists who have an amazing experience in the space. So thanks again.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.